The desert giants. Beneath the relentless Egyptian sun, rising from the shifting sands, the pyramids stand like stone mountains, giants in the desert, guardians of a story more than 4,000 years old. They are familiar to us in image, almost cliché in their silhouette, yet nothing about them feels diminished by familiarity. Every visitor who has stood before the Great Pyramid of Giza, its sides stretching higher than a modern skyscraper's 20-story frame, will tell you the stones radiate something other than mere mass. They seem less like monuments and more like survivors, as if they outlasted their builders to become entities in their own right. When the Great Pyramid was completed, around 2560 BCE, it was the tallest man-made structure on Earth, its apex piercing the sky at nearly 146 meters. For over 3,800 years, no tower or spire surpassed it. Imagine then the astonishment of the ancient world, to see a mountain where no mountain should be, engineered by human hands. Pharaoh Khufu, known in Greek as Cheops, was its patron, but that title is deceptive. Khufu did not raise stone upon stone, others did, thousands upon thousands of them, whose names history seldom remembers. Mainstream archaeology teaches us that these were not slaves in chains, as Hollywood once depicted, but labourers who rotated in service from villages across Egypt. Excavations at Giza in the 1990s uncovered the workers' village, bakeries that could feed thousands, breweries, storage for dried fish, and even healing clinics. These discoveries revealed a society mobilized not by whips, but by duty, taxation, and perhaps genuine reverence for the divine ruler. Yet scholars still debate whether this labor was voluntary devotion, forced obligation, or something in between. From a distance, the pyramids appear as simple triangular silhouettes. Up close, their complexity unravels. The Great Pyramid alone consists of more than 2 million limestone blocks, each weighing on average 2.5 tons, some far heavier. To imagine these stones dragged across desert sands without the wheel, Egypt did not yet employ it, is to step into the puzzle itself. Quarries lay miles away, and granite for the inner chambers came from Aswan, nearly 600 miles upriver. The logistics, even with our modern machines, feel staggering. Fringe theories have long flourished in the gaps left by mainstream explanations. One tale insists that giants walked the earth in ancient times, beings strong enough to lift boulders as easily as sticks of wood. Another credits civilizations lost to time, Atlantis, Lemuria, or an unnamed culture obliterated by floods long before Egypt rose. To skeptics, these myths are fantasy, yet one cannot ignore how persistent such legends have remained across cultures. Scholars still debate whether their longevity hints at some kernel of truth buried beneath centuries of embellishment. And then there is the setting, not just stone, but desert. The plateau at Giza was not chosen at random. It lies on bedrock high enough to withstand Nile floods, yet close enough to the river to ferry stones by barge. To the west stretched the endless sands, to the east the fertile black land where crops fed the kingdom. The pyramids rose at the very edge of life and death, symbolically separating the realm of the living from the land of the dead. Picture the scene as the first blocks were set, a procession of men, bare-backed under the sun, dragging sledges while chants marked rhythm. Overseers with reed pens scribbled tallies of food and labour. Dust rose like a haze, and the desert wind carried it toward the river. Above them, the first tier of stone began to define a base so vast it could cover 10 football fields. Each layer rose smaller than the last, yet together they climbed hay cable. For decades, the sound of hammers, chisels, and human breath filled the plateau. The pyramids were not alone in this landscape. To the east, mortuary temples sprawled where offerings were made for the king's spirit. To the south, the Sphinx kept silent watch, already enigmatic even in its earliest days. And around the pyramids, Mastaba tombs of nobles clustered like satellites around a planet, for every official wanted his soul close to the pharaoh's eternal beacon. Yet for all their grandeur, the pyramids we see today are shadows of what once gleamed. Their smooth casing stones of fine Tura limestone reflected the sun, dazzling white by day and glowing orange at dusk. Some scholars suggest the Great Pyramid's tip may once have been capped in electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, making it blaze like a second sun above the horizon. Imagine sailing down the Nile and seeing that gleam from miles away. It must have felt like entering a divine realm. Still, the deeper mystery remains. Why build such impossible monuments at all? To honour the dead pharaoh, yes. To secure his passage to the afterlife, certainly. But was there also an unspoken competition of legacy, a desire to defy mortality, not only spiritually but physically? Each pyramid seems to answer the one before it. Sneferu's bent pyramid corrected with the red pyramid, Khufu's masterwork overshadowing all, Khafra's beside it with its still-crowned casing stones, Menkaureh's smaller yet elegant. These were not mere tombs, they were statements of supremacy in a language carved from stone. The pyramids loom today not only as feats of engineering, but as questions carved into the horizon. We marvel at what we know, the quarries, the ramps, the labourers' bread ovens, and yet equally at what we cannot confirm. Scholars still debate whether the methods proposed could have scaled to such enormity, or whether something crucial in the Egyptians' toolkit remains undiscovered. What is clear is that, like the desert giants themselves, the mystery has endured, unyielding to time, Pharaoh's divine dream. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was never just a man. He was Horus on earth, the living embodiment of a god, the bridge between mortal flesh and the eternal order of the cosmos. For ordinary Egyptians, this wasn't an abstraction, it was the world's foundation. The sun rose because divine order prevailed, the Nile flooded because the pharaoh maintained balance, and stone monuments stretched skyward because heaven and earth met through him. When Khufu envisioned his pyramid, it was not the whim of a king with excess power, but a statement of divine continuity. To modern eyes, we see a ruler ordering a colossal tomb. To his people, he was aligning himself with Ra, the sun god, and Mahat, the principle of cosmic balance. The pyramid was less a grave than a resurrection machine, a staircase to eternity carved from limestone. The notion of the pharaoh's divinity was not invented overnight. It evolved over centuries, beginning with earlier kings who had themselves entombed in mastabas, low, flat, rectangular tombs that hugged the earth. But around 2700 BCE, Djoser and his brilliant architect Imhotep conceived something audacious, a stepped pyramid at Saqqara. Suddenly, tombs no longer crouched low but climbed upward, as if aspiring to the heavens themselves. For Egyptians, this was not symbolic art, it was metaphysical engineering. The stone steps were ladders for the pharaoh's soul. By Khufu's reign, 2 generations after Sneferu had experimented with smooth-sided pyramids. The concept of the divine pyramid was already ingrained. Khufu did not merely want a tomb, he wanted permanence, an edifice that outlasted flood, fire, and famine. Imagine him, cloaked in linen, seated upon a throne of gold and ebony as priests chanted hymns and scribes unfurled papyri of plans. His vision was not only to preserve his soul, but to brand the earth itself with proof that he was touched by the gods. Mainstream historians emphasize this drive for immortality as the heart of pyramid building. Yet another dimension lies beneath: propaganda. By commissioning the largest structure ever built, Khufu declared his rule invincible. The pyramid was not only his afterlife chamber, it was a political broadcast carved into the horizon. Every farmer, fisherman or trader who glimpsed its white sides gleaming under the sun would remember that their pharaoh was no ordinary man. Fringe tales, however, speak of dreams even more extraordinary. Some claim the pyramids were conceived not by pharaohs, but by sages from a forgotten golden age, custodians of knowledge who foresaw floods and calamities. In these stories, Khufu merely appropriated what had already been there, inscribing his cartouche on older stones. A medieval Arab chronicler tells of a pharaoh who dreamed of the stars falling and the world ending, prompting him to seal wisdom in stone vaults. Though historians dismiss these tales as legend, scholars still debate whether kernels of older traditions may have filtered into Egyptian memory, refracted into myth. Consider the rituals surrounding pyramid construction. Before the first block was laid, priests performed foundation ceremonies, burying offerings, chanting invocations, pouring libations of milk and honey into the sand. These rites were not trivial. To Egyptians, they anchored the pyramid in divine order. Just as we bless ships before launch or lay cornerstones with speeches today, the Egyptians infused their architecture with the sacred. Without divine sanction, the pyramid would not rise. With it, the labour of thousands became a holy act. The divine dream stretched beyond the structure itself. Hieroglyphic inscriptions in later pyramids, the pyramid texts, show how the tomb was imagined as a cosmic machine. Spells invoked stairways of light, celestial ferries, and doors in the sky. The king was to ascend, transform into a star, and take his seat beside Ra. To us, this is poetry. To the builders, it was instruction. Every angle of stone, every corridor and chamber was tuned to facilitate that passage. What we often forget is how radical this vision was for the common Egyptian. While the pharaoh ascended as a star, ordinary farmers returned to the dust. The afterlife, in its earliest conception, was a privilege of kings. Only much later would the promise of eternal life extend to the commoner through democratized religious practices. In Khufu's day, to labor on his pyramid was perhaps to touch eternity vicariously, to know that while one's own body would vanish, the king's soul, and by extension the order of Egypt, would endure. Even so, whispers of dissent survive. Ancient graffiti from later generations refer to Khufu not as a benevolent god-king, but as a tyrant, a ruler who demanded too much from his people. In one tale recorded by Herodotus 2,000 years later, Khufu forced his own daughter into prostitution to fund his pyramid. Whether true or slander, it reflects an undercurrent. The dream of the pharaoh could also be a nightmare for those who bore its weight. Scholars still debate whether Khufu was beloved, feared, or simply tolerated. And yet, the pyramid still stands. Its scale is so absolute that we can scarcely imagine it without conjuring images of supernatural aid or divine mandate. To stand before it is to confront a paradox. It is both entirely human and entirely beyond the human. Perhaps that is precisely what Khufu intended. He wanted his dream etched into eternity, not as a man, but as a god who once walked the earth, the builder's village. At the foot of the Giza plateau, hidden for millennia beneath layers of sand, lay a forgotten city, a place that tells us not about kings, but about the hands that shaped their dreams. This was not the palace of a pharaoh, nor the temple of a god, but the builder's village, the bustling heart of an immense workforce that fed, housed, and organised the construction of the pyramids. When archaeologists uncovered it in the 1990s, they found evidence of planning as meticulous as the pyramids themselves. Rows of long galleries, like ancient dormitories, could house hundreds of workers at a time. Enormous bakeries with ovens large enough to churn out thousands of loaves a day stood nearby. Vast quantities of cattle bones were found, suggesting a diet far richer than peasants usually enjoyed. These men were not enslaved labourers, whipped into exhaustion, but a skilled workforce sustained by the kingdom's resources. Mainstream archaeology now describes this as a rotating labour system. Farmers who lived along the Nile, idle during the flood season when their fields were underwater, were drafted to the pyramid works. They served in shifts, perhaps 3 months at a time, before returning home. This system meant that pyramid building did not starve the nation of its agricultural base, but instead harnessed downtime for monumental construction. It also gave workers a sense of participation in something greater. They were not building for wages alone, but for Egypt itself. Life in the village was not easy. Imagine the soundscape, hammering copper chisels against limestone, the rasp of saws cutting through softer stone, the calls of overseers echoing across the sand. Dust hung thick in the air, sun beat down without mercy, and the risk of injury was constant. Yet the presence of medical facilities, splints, evidence of healed fractures, reveals that workers retreated, not discarded. For a labourer in the Bronze Age, this was remarkable care. Still, debates linger. Scholars still debate whether these workers were truly volunteers, proud to serve, or conscripts compelled by duty, bound by the Pharaoh's authority. To some, the evidence of hearty meals suggests respect and value. To others, it reflects the need to keep a workforce alive under grueling strain. The truth may rest, as so often in history, somewhere in the tension between pride and pressure. Fringe thinkers spin another tale altogether. They imagine the village as a cover story, a later settlement built atop ruins of something older, while the true builders were lost civilizations or outsiders. Some point to curious graffiti left behind by work gangs, scrawled on blocks that would be hidden once construction was complete. Teams gave themselves names like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaure. To orthodox historians, these are proof of camaraderie. To fringe theorists, they suggest something stranger, that the Egyptians inscribed their presence on monuments they did not wholly understand. And yet, even the smallest detail of daily life here brings us closer to the humanity behind the stones. Excavated fish bones tell of men who tasted the Nile's bounty after long days in the sun. Pottery shards still bear fingerprints from the hands that moulded them. The faint remains of hearths speak of fires where stories must have been told, tales of family left behind, of the gods who watched over them, of the sheer audacity of what they were building. Consider the contrast. On the plateau above, the pyramid rises as a geometric marvel, silent and precise. Below, the village bustles with noise, laughter, sweat, and fatigue. The two halves are inseparable, one divine, the other deeply human. Together they remind us that the pyramids were not conjured by pharaohs alone, but by thousands of anonymous lives woven into a single monumental purpose. And yet, how many of their names survive? None, save for a few overseers scratched into ostraka. They laboured for immortality, but it was not their own. The pyramids promised eternity only to their king. The workers themselves melted into the sands of time, remembered only by the bones they left behind. Perhaps that, too, was part of the mystery. To stand in the builder's village today is to feel the echo of a society that understood sacrifice, duty, and ambition on a scale few others have matched. Without them, the desert giants above would never have risen, and with them, we glimpse not just the pharaoh's divine dream, but the human reality that made it possible, stone that defied time. At the heart of the pyramid's enigma lies not only their size, but the very stones themselves. Millions of blocks, quarried, carved, and stacked with a precision that still stuns the eye, form monuments so enduring that they seem to mock the passing of millennia. To walk around the Great Pyramid today is to encounter a question that echoes across time. How did a civilization of the Bronze Age tame such impossible weight? The materials were diverse. Most of the bulk, the inner core, was built of local limestone, quarried directly from the Giza plateau. These were rougher blocks, easier to cut and transport, But for the outer casing, the Egyptians sought far finer stone, white Tura limestone, so dazzling that when newly set, the pyramids must have gleamed like celestial beacons. And deep inside, for the most sacred chambers, they turned to granite from Aswan, nearly 600 miles away. Those blocks, weighing up to 70 tons, were floated down the Nile on barges, then dragged up ramps to their resting place. Mainstream Egyptology explains the process with ingenuity rather than magic. Teams of men used copper chisels and dolerite-pounding stones to carve blocks from quarries. Sledges hauled across sand became easier to move when water was poured ahead of them, reducing friction, a trick rediscovered by physicists in recent years. Wooden rollers were scarce, as Egypt had little timber, but levers and ropes multiplied human strength. Slowly, methodically, the pyramid rose layer by layer. And yet, doubts persist. Scholars still debate whether ramps alone could explain the feat. Some imagine massive straight ramps stretching miles into the desert, but the sheer volume of earth required would dwarf the pyramid itself. Others propose spiral ramps wrapping around the structure, invisible once construction finished. No conclusive remains of these ramps have been found. The absence fuels speculation that the Egyptians may have used methods lost to history. Here, fringe theories thrive. One claims that the stones are not quarried at all, but cast in place, early concrete poured into moulds, a technique supposedly hinted at by unusual air bubbles in certain blocks. Another suggests anti-gravity technologies, or sonic levitation, wielded by an advanced civilization. Tales circulate of power tools hidden in myth, with some even pointing to the precision of the granite sarcophagus inside the king's chamber, its angles so exact that modern engineers marvel at how copper tools could achieve them. But precision alone can mislead. Experiments by modern stonemasons have shown that with patience and endurance, granite can indeed be shaped by pounding stones and abrasive sand. What takes us hours with diamond saws could, with thousands of hands and years of effort, be achieved by ancient craftsmen. The marvel may not lie in exotic technology, but in the persistence of human labour multiplied over generations. Still, the mystery deepens when we consider scale. The Great Pyramid consists of over 2 million blocks. Set them in place at a rate of 1 every 2 minutes, working year-round, and the project still stretches decades. Was the Egyptian state so disciplined, so organised, that it could maintain such relentless pace? The builder's village suggests yes, yet scholars still debate whether a project of such magnitude might have required bursts of activity, mass mobilisations during Nile floods, rather than steady construction. Stand beside one of these blocks today, and it towers over the average person. The stones are not uniform bricks, but irregular giants fitted together with uncanny tightness. In some joints, a knife blade cannot slip between them. The Egyptians lacked iron, lacked steel, lacked pulleys as we know them, yet they achieved joins that rival modern masonry. Was it a matter of sheer manpower or a lost technique we no longer recognise? And then there is the question of endurance. These stones have weathered windstorms, earthquakes, floods, invasions, and centuries of looting, yet the core remains immovable. Medieval Cairenes quarried the smooth white casing for mosques and palaces, stripping the pyramids of their shining skin, but the rough bones resisted all. Time itself seems to falter against them. Imagine the scene. A block cut from a quarry at dawn, dragged on a sledge by dozens of men chanting to maintain rhythm, overseers measuring the incline of a ramp, water poured across sand to ease the load. Hours pass, the sun arcs overhead, and at last the block is levered into place, wedged beside its neighbours. Multiply that scene not by days but by decades, and you glimpse the unimaginable scale of the enterprise. Perhaps that is the secret of the pyramid's defiance of time. Not magic, not giants, not alien machines, but determination stretched across generations. The Egyptians understood something we struggle with today, that time itself, when harnessed by discipline, can be a tool as mighty as any machine. Yet doubts linger like shadows in the desert. Did copper tools truly suffice? Were ramps enough? Scholars still debate whether we have truly grasped the full story, or whether, like the missing casing stones, something essential has been stripped away. And so the stones remain, silent, enduring and enigmatic, monuments to both human persistence and the mysteries that still resist our understanding. Tools of an age. If the pyramids are mountains of mystery, then the question of tools is the bedrock of debate. How, with copper chisels and pounding stones, could ancient Egyptians carve through limestone, shape granite, and fit blocks with such uncanny precision? To us, accustomed to diamond saws and cranes, the answer feels elusive. Yet the toolkit of the Old Kingdom was both humble and ingenious, crafted not from modern alloys, but from patience, persistence, and invention born of necessity. Archaeological finds paint a vivid picture. At Giza, Saqqara, and other sites, copper chisels have been unearthed by the hundreds. These were not sturdy steel blades, but soft tools that dulled quickly. Workers would chisel for a short while, then take the blades back to be sharpened again and again. Blacksmiths maintained forges near the work sites, a constant rhythm of hammer and fire to keep the workforce supplied. To shape limestone, the soft stone of the pyramid core, copper sufficed. For granite, it barely scratched the surface. To tackle granite, the Egyptians turned to dolerite pounders, hard, heavy stones wielded like hammers. Experiments by modern archaeologists show that pounding repeatedly at one spot will fracture granite, creating depressions that can eventually split the block. Thousands of dolerite pounders litter ancient quarries at Aswan, mute testimony to the sweat poured into every block of granite that now rests inside the Great Pyramid. Other tools were simple but effective. Wooden sledges dragged across sand, lubricated with water, reduced friction by nearly half, a fact confirmed by modern physics. Levers and rope pulleys multiplied strength. Copper saws, tipped with sand as abrasive grit, could slice through stone over long hours. The Egyptians may not have had iron chisels, but they had time, organization, and ingenuity, and these proved powerful ally. Still, the gaps in evidence fuel speculation. Scholars still debate whether such tools alone could explain the precision of certain cuts, especially the polished granite inside the king's chamber. Some blocks fit so snugly that even modern masons marvel. Could sand abrasive saws achieve this? Possibly, but only with painstaking effort. And effort is what the Egyptians had in abundance. Fringe theories leap into those gaps. Advocates of lost technology point to drill holes found in granite, spiralling downward as if bored by mechanical drills. Some claim this proves the use of advanced machinery, perhaps powered by forgotten energy sources. Others imagine sound or resonance as tools, ancient knowledge of vibration harnessed to move stone. More daring speculations involve alien interventions, extraterrestrial engineers lending their technology to early humanity. These claims are colourful, but they often overlook the stubborn fact that simple experiments, using nothing more than replicas of ancient tools, can produce comparable results. Yet even mainstream explanations acknowledge something profound. Efficiency lay not in the tools themselves, but in the organisation behind them. A copper chisel alone is nothing. 10,000 men, each with a chisel, supplied, sharpened, and coordinated day after day, become a force capable of reshaping the earth. The pyramid was not just an engineering project, it was a logistical miracle. Picture a quarry at dawn. Workers, barefooted, swing dolerite pounders in steady rhythm, sparks of stone dust flying as fragments chip away. Others haul chisels to the forge, waiting for smiths to strike them anew on glowing anvils. Overseers mark tallies on shards of limestone, keeping track of tools, hours, output. In the distance, oxen drag sledges, while boys pour water onto the sand ahead. It is less the vision of an alien technology than of a sea eyes. Civilization utterly devoted to turning modest tools into mighty monuments. But why, we might ask, cling to such rudimentary instruments when the task demanded so much? The answer lies in cultural continuity. For Egyptians, tradition mattered. Copper had served their ancestors. It was sanctified by custom. To change the toolkit was to change the very ritual of construction, and ritual for them was as important as function. The pyramid was not only a structure, it was a sacred act. The tools themselves became part of that ceremony, imbued with meaning as well as use. And yet the question remains open-ended. Scholars still debate whether all the chambers, all the alignments, could be achieved with these simple instruments. Some argue that what we lack is not evidence of lost technology, but imagination. We underestimate what thousands of coordinated hands, guided by purpose and belief, can accomplish. Others whisper that something remains undiscovered, some secret of leverage or geometry that the Egyptians took to their graves. Perhaps the truest marvel is not the chisel, the sledge, or the pounding stone, but the mind that wielded them, the ability to see not just rock but destiny hidden inside it. With tools of an age humble and worn, the Egyptians carved eternity, the Nile's gift. Without the Nile, there would have been no pyramids. That ribbon of water, flowing more than 4,000 miles from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean, was the artery of Egypt's body, the giver of life in a desert that otherwise offered only sand and stone. Every harvest, every village, every dream of kings and gods depended on its pulse. And in the age of pyramid building, it was more than a river. It was the highway that carried eternity itself, block by block, to the plateau of Giza. Each year, the Nile rose in a great flood, inundating the black land along its banks. To the farmers, this was both a challenge and a blessing. The waters covered their fields, halting agriculture for months, but they left behind rich silt that renewed the soil. In those months of idleness, the kingdom found its labour force. Men who could not farm were conscripted, or perhaps volunteered, to haul stone, cook food, and cut timber for the Pharaoh's eternal monument. Thus, the rhythm of the river shaped the rhythm of construction. Mainstream historians point out that transporting stone by river was vastly easier than dragging it across miles of desert. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient harbour basins near Giza, places where boats could dock and unload their cargo. Limestone was ferried from quarries just across the river, while granite came from Aswan, 600 miles to the south. Imagine the sight: flotillas of wooden barges, sails catching the wind, moving silently down the current with blocks of stone weighing tens of tons. To watch such a procession would have been to glimpse a floating mountain range drifting through the reeds. The logistics were staggering. How were blocks that heavy loaded onto boats? One theory suggests that barges were lashed together in pairs, creating wider platforms. Ramps and levers eased stones aboard, where they were balanced with underweights of ballast. On arrival at Giza, canals led directly to the construction site, where workers hauled the cargo up ramps to the plateau. Scholars still debate whether these canals extended right to the base of the pyramid itself, creating a seamless chain of water and sand. Fringe thinkers, as always, tell another tale. Some claim the Nile was not merely a tool for transport, but part of a lost hydraulic technology, that water itself was harnessed to raise the blocks. In one theory, gigantic waterlocks or flotation systems lifted stones upward in stages, much like ships traversing a modern canal. Though evidence for such contraptions is lacking, the idea remains alluring, for it casts the river not just as highway, but as hidden machinery. Even without such devices, the Nile's importance was sacred as much as practical. To Egyptians, the river was a living god, happy, who brought fertility and order. The Pharaoh was its master in name, responsible for its flooding, its bounty, its gift of life. To carry pyramid stones along the Nile was not merely labour, it was a sacred procession, the river itself aiding in the king's journey to eternity. One can imagine priests chanting invocations as barges slipped past villages, locals watching with awe as blocks destined for the heavens glided by on the divine current. The Nile also carried supplies to feed the workforce. Grain, cattle, fish and jars of beer moved along the same waters, ensuring the thousands at Giza did not starve. It was a living conveyor belt, sustaining both the builders and their stone. Without it, the desert would have been impassable, the pyramid dream impossible. And yet, rivers are fickle things. Scholars still debate whether the Nile's course has shifted over the millennia, and if so, how close it once flowed to Giza. Some evidence suggests a now vanished branch of the river may have lapped directly at the foot of the plateau. If true, then the pyramids were built beside a waterway now lost to time, a forgotten Nile that once bore the lifeblood of Egypt's greatest monuments. Picture the moment, a dawn mist rising over the river, fishermen hauling in nets while, in the distance, a barge emerges, its hull groaning under the weight of stone. Oarsmen chant to the beat of a drum, priests raise their hands in blessing, and villagers pause to watch. The sun glints on the water, and for a fleeting moment it seems as if the river itself is carrying heaven toward the horizon. The Nile was Egypt's greatest gift: fertility, food, passage, and power. But in the age of pyramids, it was also a bridge between worlds, carrying stones not only from quarries to Giza, but from the realm of the living to the house of eternity. Without the river, the desert giants would never have risen. With it, they were carved into the skyline forever. The hidden engineers. When we speak of the pyramids, we imagine kings commanding and workers labouring, but between them lay another class, often overlooked, the hidden engineers. These were not rulers, nor commoners, but scribes, overseers, and architects, minds who translated divine ambition into stone reality. Their names seldom appear in popular memory, yet without their calculations, the desert giants would never have risen. Mainstream history gives us at least one name, Hemiunu, vizier to Pharaoh Khufu, and often credited as the architect of the Great Pyramid. A statue of him, discovered at Giza, shows a broad man seated in dignity, his role monumental, though his fame muted compared to his king. Hemiunu oversaw logistics, labour, quarrying, and design. He was, in many ways, the invisible pharaoh of the project, commanding thousands, while Khufu's vision loomed above all. The engineers of Egypt were mathematicians and surveyors of astonishing skill. They aligned the Great Pyramid almost perfectly to the cardinal points, deviating by less than a fraction of a degree, a feat even modern surveyors admire. Without compasses or GPS, they used the stars, citing Polaris's ancient counterpart, Thuban, in the constellation Draco. Night after night, they observed, marked, and adjusted, until their lines traced the heavens onto the earth. To them, precision was not optional, it was sacred. Behind the engineers were the scribes, the keepers of knowledge. With reed pens and papyri, they recorded supplies, tallies of labourers, delivery schedules of stone. One ostrakon fragment reveals orders for rations, bread, beer, onions, enough to feed thousands. The pyramid was not only a marvel of stone, but of paperwork, a bureaucracy humming as efficiently as the work gangs it directed. These men did not sweat under the sun, but their ink laid the framework for everything built in the sand. And then there were the overseers, the taskmasters who stood between the scribes' plans and the workers' muscles. Graffiti scrawled on hidden blocks preserved their team's nicknames: the Friends of Khufu, the Drunkards of Menkore. These small inscriptions, never meant for public eyes, reveal camaraderie, pride, and even humour among the gangs. To us, they whisper of human lives behind the myth. To fringe thinkers, they raise questions. Were such markings signs of playful work crews or secret codes hinting at knowledge concealed in stone? Scholars still debate whether these graffiti are mundane or symbolic, prosaic or profound. Consider, too, the engineers of construction logistics. They had to devise ramps, pulleys, sledges and scaffolds for each stage of the project, anticipating problems years in advance. When a stone cracked, when a ramp eroded, when floods delayed transport, it was the hidden engineers who improvised solutions. To maintain discipline over decades, across thousands of lives, was as demanding as lifting the stones themselves. Fringe traditions grant these engineers even more mystique. In some stories, they are guardians of secret wisdom, initiates of a forgotten science handed down from gods or survivors of Atlantis. In medieval lore, the name Hermes Trismegistus is linked to the pyramids, a fusion of the Egyptian Thoth and the Greek Hermes, imagined as a sage architect who preserved cosmic secrets in stone. To believers, the engineers were not mere bureaucrats, but alchemists of architecture, encoding mysteries in every angle. Whether mundane or mystical, their work is undeniable. Walk around the base of the Great Pyramid and measure. Each side stretches about 230 metres, yet the difference between the longest and shortest side is mere centimetres. Such accuracy requires more than brute labour, it requires minds attuned to both mathematics and size. Symbolism. The pyramid was as much a calculation as a construction. Imagine Hemiunu standing at dawn, surveying lines drawn across sand, priests chanting beside him. Behind him, scribes shuffle papyri, overseers gather their crews, and the hum of labour begins. He looks to the horizon, where the sun rises in perfect alignment with his markers. For a moment, perhaps, he feels what few men in history have felt, the satisfaction of bending both heaven and earth into a single line. Yet his name is known to only a handful, while Khufu's echoes across eternity. That is the paradox of the hidden engineers. The greatest works of mankind often bear the names of rulers, but they were born from the minds of others, now half forgotten. Scholars still debate whether we should see the pyramids as triumphs of kingship or triumphs of engineering genius. Perhaps they are both, inseparably entwined. And so, as the sun sets behind Giza, casting long shadows over the stones, one must remember the unseen hands that designed their place, calculated their angle, and guided their rise. Without the pharaohs, the pyramids might never have been conceived. Without the hidden engineers, they could never have been built. Stars above the desert. Long before skyscrapers pierced modern skylines, humans gazed upward and wondered. For the ancient Egyptians, the heavens were not distant lights but divine maps, guiding both daily life and eternal destiny. The pyramids, massive and immovable, were not only tombs of stone, but mirrors of the stars, a dialogue between earth and sky, etched into limestone. Stand before the Great Pyramid, and you stand before one of the most precise orientations in human history. Its sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. Scholars point to stellar alignments as the source of such accuracy. Around 2500 BCE, the pole star was not Polaris, but Thuban, in the constellation Draco. By watching its nightly circle in the sky, Egyptian astronomers could mark true north. Night after night, priests with simple sighting rods and plumb lines fixed earthly lines to heavenly paths. But the alignments go beyond the compass. The three pyramids of Giza, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure, stand in a diagonal that echoes the three stars of Orion's belt. This correlation, championed by some researchers, suggests that the builders were mapping heaven onto earth. In Egyptian myth, Orion was associated with Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. To place the king's tomb beneath Orion's stars was to place him in Osiris's company, ensuring his rebirth among the constellations. Mainstream scholars debate whether this alignment was deliberate or coincidental. But the suggestion is tantalizing. Perhaps the Giza plateau itself was a cosmic canvas. Inside the pyramids too, the heavens whisper. Narrow shafts from the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid point toward celestial targets. One aligns with Orion's belt, another with Sirius, the brightest star in the sky and sacred to Isis. Others align with circumpolar stars, the imperishables that never set, eternal in their cycle, ideal destinations for the immortal soul. These shafts were not air vents, they were star tunnels, guiding the pharaoh's spirit into the sky. Fringe theorists push these connections further. They argue that the entire Giza complex, when combined with the Nile, forms a reflection of the Milky Way, a terrestrial star map laid across the desert. Some claim the pyramids encode a celestial message, knowledge passed down from a forgotten civilization. Others insist that alignments with solstices, equinoxes, and planetary cycles prove the Egyptians possessed astronomical mastery beyond what we credit them. Skeptics counter that humans are pattern-seeking and that alignments may be less precise than they appear. Scholars still debate whether the pyramid builders were star scientists or simply myth-makers inspired by the sky. Yet one cannot ignore the Egyptian obsession with the heavens. The calendar itself was tied to the rising of Sirius, which heralded the Nile's flood. Agricultural life depended on the stars, and religious life elevated them to divine beings. To Egyptians, the afterlife was not an underworld, but a celestial one. The king became a star, sailing in the solar bark of Ra across the sky. The pyramid was his launch pad, the stars his destination. Imagine a clear night on the plateau, thousands of years ago. The desert is quiet, the pyramid's gleaming casing stones reflecting faint starlight. Priests stand with sighting rods, chanting hymns as Orion rises over the horizon. Workers rest in their village below, but above them their labour becomes part of the cosmos. Each block of stone is not only physical, but metaphysical, a step toward eternity mapped against constellations. This marriage of stone and sky is perhaps the pyramid's most enduring poetry. They are at once grounded in the bedrock and reaching for the stars, fusing earthly toil with cosmic aspiration. The Egyptians did not separate science from religion or architecture from astronomy. To them, it was all one, a universe of order, balance and meaning, written both in heaven and in stone. And so, as we look at the pyramids today, satellites above and sand below, we see what they saw, stars above the desert, eternal, guiding, mysterious. Whether coincidence or intention, myth or mathematics, their dialogue with the heavens remains. Scholars still debate whether we are deciphering an ancient science or projecting our own wonder onto old stones. Either way, the pyramids remind us that humanity has always sought to connect heaven and earth, not just with eyes raised skyward, but with monuments that could stand beneath the stars forever. Gods in stone. To step into the shadow of the pyramids is to step into a theology written not with ink but with megaliths. These were not merely tombs, not merely feats of engineering, they were sermons in stone, embodying the sacred worldview of a people who saw no distinction between politics, religion, and the cosmos. To understand who really built the pyramids, we must understand not only the workers and the tools, but the gods they served, for every block was placed in devotion to powers greater than any mortal king. The pyramid itself was a symbol of the Ben-Ben, the primeval mound that rose from the waters of chaos at the dawn of creation. According to Egyptian belief, the sun first rose on that mound, giving birth to all life. Every pyramid, therefore, was a recreation of that sacred moment, the king's eternal home constructed as the universe's first hill. Its sloping sides, gleaming white with limestone casing, captured the rays of the sun and funneled them skyward. The pharaoh entombed within was not simply dead, he was reborn each dawn, riding the light into eternity. Mainstream Egyptology confirms this solar symbolism. The pyramid texts carved into the walls of later pyramids, such as those at Saqqara, are spells and hymns that speak directly of the king ascending to the sky, becoming one with Ra, the sun god. These inscriptions are among the earliest religious texts in human history, and they leave little doubt. The pyramid was a machine for resurrection, a stairway for the soul. But the gods who resided within its geometry were many. Osiris, lord of the afterlife, welcomed the king into his realm. Isis, his sister wife, guarded him with magic. Thoth, scribe of the gods, recorded his deeds. Each god had a role in the pharaoh's transformation. The pyramid was not only a tomb, it was a cosmic stage where myth became reality, where stone corridors led not just to chambers, but to eternity. There are stranger echoes too. Fringe theorists claim that the dimensions of the Great Pyramid encode hidden knowledge, a divine blueprint. They point to mathematical constants supposedly embedded in its proportions: pi, phi, even the speed of light. To them, the pyramid was not only a temple to the gods, but a message from them, a universal key disguised as architecture. Skeptics reject these claims, noting that ratios can be cherry-picked and coincidences multiplied. Scholars still debate whether the pyramid's geometry was deliberate symbolism or merely the byproduct of practical design. Yet even mainstream scholars agree the builders were thinking cosmologically. The pyramid complex at Giza was more than a tomb, it was a landscape of gods. Mortuary temples were dedicated to Ra, causeways aligned with solstices, and subsidiary pyramids for queens echoed the divine family. Sphinxes guarded the sacred precincts, embodying the fusion of king and sun. Everything was designed to assert the pharaoh not merely as ruler, but as a living god, the earthly counterpart of cosmic order, the divine concept of Ma'at. One quirky detail often overlooked is the role of ritual games and festivals. At the Hebsed festival, the pharaoh ran a course symbolizing the renewal of his power, proving his vitality before gods and men. Some scholars suggest that pyramid complexes may have been ceremonial backdrops for such performances, a stage where the king enacted his divine renewal, cementing both his power and his eternal destiny. Imagine the inauguration of a newly completed pyramid. Priests clad in leopard skins chant hymns. Bulls are sacrificed. Incense fills the air, and the king, radiant in gold, walks the causeway as the sun sets. He enters the temple, offering himself to the gods as both servant and equal. Behind him, the pyramid gleams in the fading light, a mountain of stone consecrated as the ladder to heaven. It is in this union of religion and architecture that the pyramids transcend mere monuments. They were not built only by human hands, but by divine command, expressions of a worldview where gods walked among men and men could become gods. Even today, as we stand in their shadows, we sense that ambition, that yearning for eternity, written not in papyrus but in limestone, not in prayer but in stone. The pyramids were, above all, gods in stone, silent, immovable, eternal sermons of a civilization that saw divinity in every grain of sand, every ray of sunlight, every star above. And in those vast chambers, in those sacred passages, the voice of Egypt's god still whispers, "The Pharaoh is not gone, he has risen." Forgotten engineers. Behind the grandeur of the pyramids, behind the myths of gods and pharaohs, lies a quieter story, the story of minds. For while thousands laboured with muscle and sweat, it was the engineers, architects, and mathematicians of Egypt who provided the vision. Their names are mostly lost, their writings sparse, but their influence is carved into every angle and every stone. To speak of the pyramids without them is to tell only half the tale. The most famous among them is Imhotep, vizier to King Djoser, architect of the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. Living around 2650 BCE, Imhotep transformed burial architecture forever. Before him, kings were buried beneath low, flat mastabas, simple rectangular structures. But Imhotep envisioned something more ambitious, stacking mastabas one atop another until a stairway to the heavens emerged. The step pyramid, rising in 6 terraces, became the prototype for all future pyramids. It was Imhotep who first married stone to eternity, and later generations revered him as a sage, healer, even a god of wisdom. Mainstream scholars acknowledge Imhotep's genius, but also remind us that he did not work alone. An entire class of scribes, surveyors, and artisans made his vision reality. Hieroglyphic records speak of chiefs of works and overseers of masons. These were the managers of antiquity, the unsung engineers whose calculations guided every block. Their tools were simple: plumb bobs, leveling cords, sighting rods. But their precision was astonishing. The Great Pyramid's base deviates from a perfect square by less than 20 centimeters. Without iron, without computers, they achieved alignments we would struggle to replicate even with modern machinery. Fringe theorists, noting this precision, often leap to alternative explanations. They argue that such accuracy required lost technologies, perhaps advanced tools of copper-hardened alloys, perhaps even knowledge handed down from a forgotten civilization, some whisper of Atlantean engineers or extraterrestrial surveyors. But mainstream archaeologists point to the power of human ingenuity. When thousands of lives depended on the king's successful journey to eternity, failure was not an option. Knowledge accumulated over generations, trial, error, refinement, until perfection was achieved. Scholars still debate whether Egyptian engineering genius arose purely through gradual innovation, or whether some lost leap in technology hastened their mastery. One quirky tidbit lies in the ostraca, shards of limestone found near workers' villages, inscribed with sketches, calculations, and even jokes. On one, a rough drawing shows a pyramid plan. On another, a worker scrawled a cartoon mocking his overseer. These fragments remind us that behind the silent stones were human hands, human minds, and human humour. Engineering, for the Egyptians, was not abstract theory, but lived practice, written in sweat and laughter as much as in stone. Picture an engineer standing at dawn on the Giza plateau. He squints along a cord stretched taut between 2 pegs, checking for straightness. Behind him, labourers prepare sledges. To his left, a scribe tallies deliveries of granite. To his right, priests mutter prayers for divine alignment. He is the fulcrum, balancing science and faith, numbers and ritual. He may not know that millennia later tourists will marvel at his work, but in that moment he knows he is shaping eternity. It is tempting to see only pharaohs when we gaze at the pyramids, but the stones speak equally of their forgotten engineers, the minds that calculated the angles, devised the ramps, organised the workforce, and turned chaos into order. If the pharaoh was the heart of Egypt, these were its veins, carrying knowledge from mind to monument. And though history may not have preserved their names, their legacy towers still, vast and unshaken. Every precise alignment, every flawless join, every enduring block is their silent signature, written not in ink but in eternity. The pyramids are theirs as much as any king's, the monuments of forgotten engineers whose genius still humbles us. Workers' villages. When we imagine the pyramids being built, the image that often surfaces is one of endless chains of slaves, whipped under a scorching sun, dragging massive stones. Hollywood has painted it that way, and centuries of storytelling have hardened the idea. Yet the sands of Giza have revealed a very different truth, a story of bustling workers' villages, of skilled labourers fed and housed by the state, of lives lived in the shadow of the king's eternal tomb. Archaeologists call it Hayt el Ghurab, the lost city of the pyramid builders, lying just south of the Sphinx. Excavations have uncovered a planned settlement, long barracks-like dormitories, bakeries, breweries, storerooms, even evidence of medical care. These were not the shacks of slaves, but the organised quarters of a workforce numbering in the thousands. Each barracks could house 50 men, sleeping side by side on raised platforms. Their diet was surprisingly rich: beef, sheep, goat and fish, along with bread and beer as staples. Some bones suggest cattle were slaughtered in enormous numbers, evidence of a state supplying its workers generously. Mainstream scholars point to these discoveries as proof that pyramid building was a national project, not a system of mass enslavement. The workers were likely conscripted peasants, serving their pharaoh as a form of taxation in labour. Others were specialists: masons, metal workers, carpenters. Some rotated in for seasonal stints, while others lived permanently at the site, forming a community bound together by purpose. To toil for the pharaoh was to serve the gods, to secure a place in eternity. And yet, there were quirks that remind us these were ordinary people. Graffiti scratched onto blocks in hidden chambers record team names like the Drunkards of Menkor or the Friends of Khufu. These nicknames read like sports teams, suggesting camaraderie, humour and pride. One ostrakon even records a worker complaining about being assigned too much fish, a timeless voice of workplace grumbling echoing across millennia. Fringe writers, however, interpret the workers' villages differently. Some suggest the remains prove the pyramids were built in phases by rotating guilds of specialized workers, akin to secret brotherhoods preserving sacred knowledge. Others claim the scale of organization hints at outside intervention, perhaps a blueprint provided by lost masters of engineering. Scholars still debate whether these workers were truly free men with civic pride, or whether state control blurred the line between duty and coercion. The village also reveals the hidden costs of greatness. Skeletons unearthed show signs of stress fractures, arthritis, and injuries from hauling heavy loads. But there is also evidence of healing, broken bones that had been set, individuals who lived long after severe injuries. Some may have limped for the rest of their lives, yet they survived thanks to care from their peers. Far from being discarded labour, these workers were valued enough to be nursed back to health. Imagine it. At night, after a day of dragging stones up ramps, the workers gather around fires. Laughter rings out, drums beat, and beer flows thick and frothy. Children chase each other between the huts. Women prepare food, and elders tell stories of gods and kings. In the distance, the pyramid looms, half-built, glowing in moonlight. For these villagers, it was both workplace and cosmos, a project bigger than themselves, but infused into their daily lives. To walk through their remains today is to see the human heartbeat behind the stone colossus. The pyramids were not the work of faceless slaves, but of communities, men and women who cooked, healed, laughed, and loved while building eternity. The stones may bear the pharaoh's name, but the footprints in the dust belong to the workers of Giza. They are the true citizens of immortality, their village as vital to the story as the pyramid itself. Ramps and levers. How did human hands lift millions of limestone blocks, some weighing more than 70 tons, into the sky? This question has haunted scholars, dreamers, and skeptics for centuries. The pyramids rise with such immensity that the very act of building them feels almost supernatural. Yet beneath the mystery lies a story of ramps, levers, and sheer persistence, the mechanics of human will translated into stone. The mainstream consensus is that ramps provided the key. No cranes of steel, no diesel engines, just earth, wood, rope, and muscle. Archaeologists propose several ramp designs. The most straightforward was a straight, linear ramp leading up one side of the pyramid. Workers would drag blocks on sledges, lubricated with water or oil, up the incline. The problem, of course, is scale. Such a ramp would need to be longer than the pyramid itself, stretching hundreds of meters into the desert. Dismantling it afterward would have been a colossal project in its own right. To solve this, some scholars suggest zigzagging switchback ramps, clinging to the sides of the rising pyramid like mountain trails. Others imagine a spiraling ramp encircling the structure, hidden beneath its outer casing. Each design has merits and flaws, and no single theory has won universal acceptance. Scholars still debate whether the Egyptians combined multiple ramp systems or used entirely different methods now lost to time. Fringe theorists seize upon this uncertainty. Some argue that levers and counterweights, giant seesaws of wood and rope, were more efficient than ramps. Others whisper of ancient water locks, like primitive canal systems, lifting stones by buoyancy. The boldest claim outside knowledge entirely, anti-gravity devices, sonic levitation, or extraterrestrial technology. The absence of definitive evidence leaves room for imagination, and into that vacuum flows speculation. Yet archaeology does provide tantalizing glimpses. In 2014, near the Red Sea, papyri from the time of Khufu were discovered, records of a workman named Merer. His journals describe transporting limestone along the Nile, then through canals and causeways to the Giza plateau. Though they do not detail ramps, they confirm the logistical genius of the builders, fleets of boats, networks of waterways, and organized delivery of thousands of blocks. The pyramid was not only an engineering project, but also a logistical empire, moving stone like blood through arteries. One quirky but revealing discovery comes from wall art, showing men dragging a statue on a sledge, while another pours water onto the sand in front of it. For years, scholars overlooked the detail until physicists recreated the experiment. Dampened sand reduces friction by nearly half. With simple water, the Egyptians turned an impossible drag into a manageable task. Imagine the scene: workers chanting rhythmically, ropes straining, sweat pouring, while another man sprinkles water before them, the unsung hero ensuring the stone glides rather than grinds. Still, questions remain. How were the heaviest granite blocks lifted into the king's chamber, more than 40 meters above ground? Some suggest nested ramps, each dismantled after use. Others point to lever systems, wooden beams wedged under blocks, ratcheted up level by level. None of these answers fully satisfy, and perhaps that is the point. The pyramids hold their secrets because they were not built by one method alone, but by a fluid, adaptive blend of techniques. Close your eyes and imagine the construction site. The air is thick with dust. A sledge creaks as dozens of men pull, their bodies swaying in unison. Overseers shout instructions, drums beat the tempo. On the horizon, ramps snake upward, earthen mountains nearly as vast as the pyramid itself. At intervals, men wedge levers beneath stones, coaxing them upward with groans of timber. It is not alien technology at work, but patience, rhythm, and human persistence. And perhaps therein lies the deeper truth. We want mystery, we crave impossible solutions, but sometimes the most extraordinary achievement is that ordinary methods, repeated on an unimaginable scale, can create wonders that seem impossible. The pyramids are less a riddle of mechanics and more a hymn to determination itself. The hidden chambers. The pyramids appear, at first glance, to be simple geometric forms, triangles of stone rising against the desert sky. Yet within those towering facades lie chambers, shafts, and voids that continue to surprise us even after centuries of exploration. If the exterior tells the story of mass labour, the interior whispers secrets of ritual, design, and perhaps even lost purposes. The most famous example is the king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Lined with massive granite blocks, its ceiling is formed by layered, relieving chambers designed to distribute weight, an astonishing feat of engineering. Above, great beams of granite, each weighing dozens of tons, lie stacked like a giant puzzle. How these were placed so high inside the pyramid remains one of the enduring mysteries. Scholars point to ingenious ramps and cranes of wood, but the precision remains staggering. And yet, beyond the king's chamber lies the so-called Queen's Chamber, a smaller, more enigmatic room. Two narrow shafts rise from its walls, too small for a human to crawl through. For decades they baffled researchers. Were they air vents, ritual passageways for the soul? In the 1990s, a robotic camera crawled through one, only to discover a tiny stone door with copper fittings, seemingly leading to nowhere. When a second robot pierced the block, it revealed another small chamber, sealed again. No treasure, no clear function, just mystery deepening behind every wall. Scholars still debate whether these voids were symbolic, spiritual passages, or concealed structural devices. In 2017, technology opened another chapter. The Scan Pyramids project, using cosmic ray muon detectors, identified a vast void above the Grand Gallery, a space as large as a passenger plane, hidden for 4,500 years. To this day, no one knows what lies inside. Is it simply a relieving cavity, like the Charl? Embers above the king's chamber? Or could it be something deliberately hidden, an untouched chamber holding ritual objects, or perhaps nothing at all? The void sits silent, just beyond human reach, as if the pyramid itself guards its final secret. Fringe interpretations flourish here. Some propose that the hidden voids are not structural, but designed to conceal ancient knowledge, mathematical tablets, star maps, or even technology from a forgotten civilization. A few go further, claiming the shafts were designed as communication conduits to the stars, aligning with Orion's belt or Sirius, guiding the pharaoh's soul outward into eternity. Whether symbolic or literal, the pyramid's interior suggests a purpose that transcends mere burial. Quirky details abound. In 1837, British explorer Howard Vyse blasted into the relieving chambers above the king's chamber, leaving black soot marks that remain today. Inside, he discovered hieroglyphic graffiti, naming Khufu's work crews, proof, many say, of royal authorship. Yet fringe critics argue that Vyse's discovery was too convenient, perhaps even forged to cement Khufu's claim. Scholars still debate whether the pyramid's hidden inscriptions are authentic or manipulated. Imagine the feeling of being the first to crawl through a narrow shaft, torch flickering, walls pressing in, air thick and stale. Ahead lies a stone that no one has touched for millennia. Every inch forward feels like trespassing into a sacred secret. Even today, robotic probes extend that sensation, peering into tiny spaces where no human has set foot since the pyramid was sealed. Each discovery feels less like archaeology and more like conversing with the dead. The hidden chambers remind us of a truth. The pyramids are not just monuments, but layered texts, written in stone, coded with voids, shafts, and silence. They are built to endure and to perplex. Their mysteries were not accidents, but design, deliberate enigmas left to echo through time. And as we peer deeper with ever more advanced tools, the pyramids seem to whisper back, offering glimpses but never full answers. It is as if they were built not just to honor the dead, but to eternally provoke the living, workers or slaves. Few questions ignite more debate than who actually built the pyramids. Were they the backbreaking work of enslaved masses, whipped into submission under the desert sun? Or were they constructed by loyal labourers, farmers, craftsmen and specialists, contributing to a collective dream of eternity? The truth, as always, lies somewhere between legend and evidence. For centuries, popular imagination painted the builders as slaves. Ancient Greek historians like Herodotus wrote of hundreds of thousands labouring in misery. Later, Western culture reinforced this image, sometimes linking it with biblical stories of the Israelites in Egypt. The idea of endless chains of slaves dragging stones suited both drama and moral cautionary tales. It made the pyramids seem not only wondrous, but tragic, symbols of oppression immortalised in limestone. but archaeology has slowly rewritten this narrative. In the 1990s, near the Giza Plateau, excavations uncovered vast workers' villages, barracks, bakeries, breweries, and even cemeteries. Far from being starved or broken, the workers were well-fed, consuming beef, fish, and bread in quantities beyond ordinary Egyptians. Their skeletal remains show evidence of medical care. Broken bones healed, arthritis treated, even amputations survived. This was not a disposable slave force, it was an organized workforce with dignity. Mainstream scholars now argue that the pyramid builders were conscripted farmers, mobilized during the Nile's flood season when fields lay underwater and agricultural labor paused. For a few months each year, they would join the project, receive food, housing, and perhaps a sense of honor. In this view, the pyramids were less a monument of tyranny and more a national project, uniting tens of thousands in devotion to the Pharaoh. Still, debates linger. Were all workers treated equally? The cemetery reveals differences, some graves simple, others more elaborate, suggesting hierarchy even among labourers. Overseers lived better, common workers endured harder conditions. The presence of graffiti, teams proudly naming themselves things like the Drunkards of Menkaure or the Friends of Khufu, suggests camaraderie, yet also an echo of coercion. The state demanded service, whether voluntary or not. Scholars still debate whether participation was patriotic duty, seasonal taxation, or thinly veiled conscription. Fringe interpretations challenge the entire idea. Some theorists insist the scale of the pyramids required far more manpower than seasonal workers could supply, pointing instead to the possibility of an enslaved underclass hidden from official records. Others stretch further, claiming advanced technology reduced human labour drastically, so the question of who built them becomes irrelevant. One quirky detail stands out: the workers' beer. Archaeologists found brewing vats capable of producing thousands of litres daily. Beer was not merely a drink, but a wage, liquid bread, sustaining both body and spirit. Imagine a worker finishing a day of hauling stone, collapsing into camp, then lifting a jug of foamy beer brewed only hours before. The pyramids rose not only on sweat and muscle, but on calories and ale. To picture the scene, we might close our eyes and wander through the workers' village. Smoke rises from ovens, baking endless loaves. Children run between huts, chasing each other with reeds. Women stir cauldrons of porridge. In the distance, men sing rhythmic chants as they pull sledges, their voices echoing off stone. At night, laughter, music, and beer fill the camps. These were not faceless slaves in chains, but humans, families, friends, communities, bound together by the monumental task. And yet, we cannot romanticize it entirely. Life was still hard. Injuries were frequent, labour was grueling, and death often came young. Many of the skeletal remains show worn joints, fractured spines, and teeth ground down by sand-laced bread. Even with beer and meat, their service was no holiday. It was devotion through exhaustion. The debate over slaves versus workers reflects something larger, our need to interpret the pyramids as mirrors of ourselves. Do we see them as symbols of oppression, echoing modern struggles against tyranny? Or do we see them as triumphs of cooperation, proof that humans can unite to achieve the impossible? The evidence suggests both: suffering and pride, coercion and community. And so the pyramids rise not just as monuments to pharaohs, but as monuments to the labouring hands who left no names. They are the anonymous legacy of thousands, their sweat etched into stone, their laughter and groans echoing still in the desert wind. Ancient tools or lost technology. If the pyramids stand as marvels of engineering, the question of how they were built lingers in the tools left behind, or, perhaps more intriguingly, the tools that seem absent. For every copper chisel and dolerite pounder found on the Giza plateau, there remains a whisper of suspicion. Could such rudimentary instruments truly carve, shape, and transport millions of stones with such precision? Mainstream archaeology paints a clear picture. Workers used dolerite pounders, hard, dense stones, to chip away at softer limestone. For granite, the harder material that formed the king's chamber and sarcophagi, copper chisels were hammered repeatedly, needing constant replacement. Wooden sledges dragged blocks across the sand, lubricated by water to reduce friction. Simple levers, ropes, and manpower provided the rest. To most Egyptologists, these modest tools, multiplied by thousands of hands, explain the grandeur we see today. And yet, the evidence sometimes seems at odds with the theory. Take the famous saw marks found on granite blocks at Giza and in nearby quarries. Some grooves appear as though left by circular saws, cutting deep and smooth, with precision difficult to reconcile with pounding stones. Scholars still debate whether these marks were accidental, the result of dragging abrasives back and forth, or whether they hint at something more advanced, an understanding of mechanics or tools lost to time. The sarcophagus inside Khufu's pyramid provides another conundrum. Its interior is polished with remarkable flatness, the corners square, the surfaces smooth. Could copper chisels truly achieve such perfection? Fringe theorists argue that abrasives such as quartz sand could have been applied, acting like primitive industrial grinding. Others leap further, claiming evidence of lost machines, giant saws, drills, even knowledge of sonic or vibrational cutting. One quirky discovery comes from the unfinished obelisk in Aswan. Half carved from bedrock, it lies cracked where it was abandoned. Along its sides, the tool marks ripple in parallel patterns, as if some large cutting device swept rhythmically across the granite. To conventional archaeologists, these are traces of pounding stones. To fringe minds, they are fingerprints of advanced machines. Even in transportation, debates persist. Reliefs show sledges, ropes, and crowds of men hauling statues. A famous tomb painting depicts a worker pouring water in front of a sledge, lubricating the sand, a detail that modern physics has confirmed would halve the effort. Yet skeptics question, could sledges truly move 70-ton granite beams from Aswan over 500 miles away, across river and desert? Scholars still debate whether log rollers, barges, or more complex methods were involved. Fringe theories bloom here like desert flowers after rain. Some claim the Egyptians inherited techniques from a forgotten civilization, one that understood metallurgy or even electricity. Others suggest sound, resonance capable of levitating stone, an idea inspired by later legends of monks moving rocks with chanting. A more outlandish branch insists extraterrestrial visitors lent their machines, pointing to laser-like precision as evidence. While such claims stretch credulity, they resonate with a simple human truth. We struggle to imagine that simple tools could yield monumental perfection. Imagine standing in an ancient quarry, hammerstone in hand, striking at granite under the relentless sun. Sparks flash, arms ache, progress is slow. Multiply this by thousands of hands, thousands of days, and one begins to see how patience, not magic, shape the stones. Yet doubt lingers. How did they align so perfectly, lift so high, and carve so true? Perhaps the real marvel is not in lost technology, but in persistence. The ancients needed no machines if they had centuries of accumulated skill, organization, and the will to endure tedium. Technology, after all, is only amplified patience, and the Egyptians had both. Still, every tool found, every mark studied, keeps the debate alive. Were the pyramids built with nothing more than copper, stone, and sweat? Or is there, hidden in the silence of the quarries, the ghost of a forgotten science? The question remains open, like a puzzle half carved from granite. Alignment with the stars. Beneath the desert sun, the pyramids are not merely stone mountains, they are instruments of the heavens. For centuries, people have marvelled not only at their size but at their uncanny alignment, as if the builders sought to bind earth and sky together with precision we can barely match today. Mainstream fact first, the Great Pyramid of Khufu is aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree. For comparison, most modern cities, laid out with surveying equipment and satellites, rarely achieve such exactitude. Scholars point to the Egyptians' skill with the stars. By watching the circumpolar constellations, they could trace the invisible line of the north-south axis, then peg it to the ground using simple tools, plumb bobs, sighting rods, and a cord stretched taut. No compasses, no lasers, only careful eyes and patient observation. But alignment goes deeper. Some researchers note that the three pyramids of Giza mirror the pattern of Orion's belt. From above, the layout of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure seems to trace those three glittering stars. The Nile itself, running nearby, has been likened to the Milky Way, suggesting the entire plateau was envisioned as a cosmic landscape. Scholars still debate whether this connection was intentional or coincidence. Did the architects deliberately write Orion into the desert, or do we see patterns where none were meant? Ancient texts hint at Orion's significance. The constellation was associated with Osiris, the god of death and rebirth. If the pyramids were designed as gateways for the pharaoh's soul, then aligning them to Orion might symbolize his union with the eternal sky. Through this lens, the pyramids were not just tombs, but launch pads, celestial engines aimed at eternity. There are other celestial puzzles, the so-called air shafts inside Khufu's pyramid, long thought to be ventilation, are to point to specific stars. One shaft aligns roughly with Orion's belt during the pyramid's construction, another towards Sirius, the star linked to Isis. In this reading, the pyramid is less a tomb and more a star map in stone, guiding the soul along a cosmic highway. Quirky tidbits add colour. Some fringe writers note that during the vernal equinox, the setting sun casts shadows between the pyramids in patterns reminiscent of hieroglyphic symbols. Others claim that on certain nights, starlight seems to fall directly along the causeways leading to the pyramids, as though the structures themselves were choreographed to celestial rhythms. While not all of these claims withstand scrutiny, they highlight the pervasive sense that Giza was tuned to the universe. The debate is not only about intent, but about method. How did the Egyptians achieve such precise alignment without modern tools? Some suggest they tracked the rising and setting of stars, using long corridors as sighting tunnels. Others argue that the shadow of a vertical gnomon, a simple stick, was enough if measured carefully across the seasons. Scholars still debate whether their accuracy was the result of centuries of trial and error, or whether some more advanced system of astronomy existed. Fringe theories, of course, take the stars to even greater heights. Some claim the pyramids are part of a global grid, aligned with megaliths from Stonehenge to Teotihuacan, forming an ancient map visible only from the heavens. Others whisper that extraterrestrial visitors may have guided the layout, using Orion as a calling card. Such claims push beyond evidence, but they underscore a truth. The pyramids were never meant to be just terrestrial. They were, in form and function, cosmic. Imagine standing at Giza at night, 4.5 millennia ago. The desert is silent, the air cool. Above, the Milky Way stretches across the black dome of the sky. The pyramids gleam faintly in moonlight, their polished limestone catching starlight like mirrors. A priest points to Orion, tracing lines in the sand, aligning the earthly with the divine. In that moment, architecture, astronomy, and spirituality fuse into a single vision, eternity mapped in stone. The pyramids remind us that ancient peoples did not separate the heavens from daily life. To them, the rising of Sirius heralded the Nile's flood. The rhythm of the stars was the rhythm of survival. Aligning the pyramids to the cosmos was not decorative, it was essential. They were monuments not only to kings, but to the order of the universe, ensuring that as long as the stars turned, Egypt would endure. Power of symbolism. Long after the stones were laid and the workers had gone home to their villages, the pyramids began to speak in a language beyond engineering. Their meaning was not only practical, nor even purely religious, it was symbolic. Each sloping face, each towering height, radiated a message meant to endure longer than papyrus or speech. The pyramids, at their heart, were a statement. Mainstream scholarship often frames them as symbols of royal power. Pharaohs were not merely kings, but divine intermediaries, sons of the gods. To raise a pyramid was to raise proof, visible proof, that the ruler commanded order in a chaotic world. The sheer scale declared authority. A farmer working the floodplain might never meet Khufu in person, but each time he looked to the horizon, the pyramid reminded him, Egypt is strong, the king eternal. But symbolism is rarely singular. The pyramid's very shape carried layers of meaning. It evoked the primeval mound, the first hill that rose from the waters of chaos in Egyptian creation myths. To build in that form was to tie the king's legacy to the birth of the cosmos itself. The sloping sides also echoed sunbeams, connecting Earth to Ra, the solar deity. Thus, each pyramid became both birthplace and sunray, grounding the pharaoh in eternity. Scholars still debate whether the pyramids were primarily solar symbols, funerary monuments, or both. Quirky tidbits illustrate how symbols evolve. In later dynasties, small pyramids appeared atop tombs of nobles, not monumental but miniatures, as though the symbolism had trickled down into society. In Nubia to the south, pyramids multiplied in number, sharper in angle, echoing but altering Egypt's design. These miniature echoes reveal how the pyramid was more than a building style. It was a cultural icon adopted and adapted across centuries. For fringe thinkers, symbolism stretches further, and some argue the pyramids encode secret knowledge, mathematics, geometry, even prophecy. The Great Pyramids' dimensions, they claim, hold the value of pi, the golden ratio, and even predictions of world events measured along its passageways. Mainstream historians caution that these patterns may be coincidences, products of our own tendency to find meaning where none was intended. Still, the allure persists. Was the pyramid merely a tomb, or a coded message in stone, a text meant to outlast time itself? The symbolic power extended beyond Egypt. To the Greeks, visiting Giza centuries later, the pyramids stood as wonders of the world, monuments to human ambition. To medieval travellers, they were mysterious storehouses of forgotten wisdom. Even today, the pyramid remains one of the most enduring shapes in global culture, used in logos, architecture, and art. Its form suggests strength, stability, and mystery, a universal symbol that transcends its original setting. Imagine the experience of a villager walking toward Giza in 2500 BCE. The pyramid looms on the horizon, its polished limestone shining so bright it almost blinds. To the villager, it is not simply a building, it is the sun's power made manifest, the afterlife's gate. Each stone is a prayer, each angle a sermon. The monument itself teaches, wordlessly, of cosmic order and divine kingship. The symbolism also functioned politically. To build a pyramid was to bind a nation together under a shared project. Tens of thousands laboured, but each stone laid became a piece of collective memory. The monument said, "We built this together, we endure together." In that way, the pyramid was both royal propaganda and national identity carved into rock. Scholars still debate whether the symbolic meanings were deliberate layers woven by priests and architects, or whether later generations overlaid them retrospectively. Perhaps both are true. Symbols grow just as monuments weather and shift. What begins as a practical tomb becomes, over time, an icon of eternity. The pyramid's ultimate power lies in its ability to transcend interpretation. Whether seen as a tomb, a sunray, a prophecy, or a political tool, its symbolism cannot be contained in one frame. The pyramid is, by design, inexhaustible. Each generation has found new meanings in its stones, and perhaps that was always the point, to build a symbol so vast it could never truly be emptied. Who really built them? The journey has led us through quarries and chambers, myths and mathematics, sweat and speculation. Now we arrive at the question whispered in documentaries, debated in classrooms, and etched in the imagination of all who stand before the pyramids. Who really built them? The mainstream answer, grounded in evidence, points to the people of Egypt themselves. Excavations at Giza have uncovered workers' villages, rows of modest houses, bakeries, breweries, and even medical facilities. Graffiti on pyramid blocks bear the names of work gangs with cheeky titles like the Drunkards of Menkaure or the Friends of Khufu. These were not enslaved multitudes, but organised crews, proud of their labour, bound by loyalty to their king and the promise of eternal reward. Archaeologists date this workforce to around 2600 BCE, during Egypt's Old Kingdom, when centralised authority was strong and resources abundant. And yet, questions linger. If simple tools truly sufficed, why do some blocks bear marks suggesting advanced methods? Why do certain alignments seem impossibly precise? Fringe theories argue for lost civilizations, Atlantean sages, or even extraterrestrial engineers. They point to the global spread of pyramidal forms, from Mesoamerica to Mesopotamia, as evidence of a shared, forgotten heritage. Scholars still debate whether these parallels are coincidence, cultural diffusion, or independent invention born of human ingenuity under similar skies. One quirky observation comes from Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE. He claimed that machines of short wooden planks were used to raise blocks from step to step. Was this accurate memory or second-hand myth? No such devices survive, but his words remind us that ancient voices too struggled to explain the mystery of the pyramids. The truth may lie not in extremes, but in a spectrum. On one end, the sweat, planning, and brilliance of ancient Egyptians armed with copper chisels, rope, and vision. On the other, the human tendency to magnify, to imagine that such grandeur must hide secrets. Perhaps both matter. The pyramids are not only stone, they are mirrors reflecting our desire for wonder. If we accept that Egyptians built them, we still must ask why they could. What social conditions aligned to make such feats possible? The Nile's regular floods ensured food surpluses. Centralized power under a divine king mobilized labor. Religious belief infused every stone with cosmic purpose. In this convergence, geography, politics, faith, Egyptian society became capable of reshaping its landscape on a scale rarely matched since. And yet, the debate itself is part of the legacy. To wonder who built the pyramids is to participate in their story. They invite speculation, demand awe, and resist final answers. They were meant to endure, to outlast certainty, to remain both monument and riddle. So who really built them? The Egyptians, yes. Farmers and artisans, planners and priests, kings and workers. But also, in a sense, we all do. Each generation rebuilds them in the imagination, layering new meanings, theories, and dreams upon their stones. The pyramids live because we continue to ask the question, knowing full well it may never be settled. And perhaps that is their greatest secret. Not hidden tools or alien blueprints, but the enduring human impulse to reach beyond ourselves, to leave behind something so immense it forces the future to wonder. Conclusion. The sands of Giza whisper a story that is at once ancient and eternal. Over these long hours we have walked beside quarrymen, priests, pharaohs and dreamers, tracing how the pyramids rose from bedrock to sky. They are tombs, symbols and mysteries, each block a line in a poem written in stone. Scholars provide answers about labour villages, copper chisels, celestial alignments. Yet the pyramids resist confinement to one truth. They remain riddles by design, engineered not only to protect a king's body, but to ignite imagination across millennia. Who really built the pyramids? The hands of Egyptians, yes, but also the dreams of humankind. Every theory, from academic to fringe, is a reflection of our need to see ourselves in their stones, to believe that we too can reach eternity. That is their power. They are monuments, not just to a single people, but to wonder itself,